I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A 5-hour train ride wasn't exactly thrilling, but I had planned ahead to make it bearable. I had booked my ticket early, ensuring that I had a reserved seat. With my heart condition, standing for long periods could be exhausting, so having a guaranteed place to sit was a necessity, not just a convenience. As I stepped onto the train, I could already tell it was packed. People were crammed into every available space, and the noise of chatter, luggage shifting, and the occasional frustrated sigh filled the air. I weaved my way through the aisle, carefully maneuvering past passengers with large bags and people standing uncomfortably in the limited space. When I finally reached my designated seat, my stomach dropped slightly. A woman was sitting there, her head down, seemingly lost in her phone. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to be polite. This was likely a mistake. Maybe she hadn't realized it was reserved. "Excuse me," I said, offering her a small, non-confrontational smile. "I think you might be in my seat." She barely glanced up, her face neutral as she pulled out her ticket. Her eyes flickered over the details, and she hesitated for a moment before giving a small shrug. "Oh," she said flatly. "I must have sat in the wrong seat." She didn't move. I waited for her to stand, expecting her to shift over or find her assigned spot. But instead she lowered her gaze back to her phone, as if that was the end of the discussion. I cleared my throat. "Right. So, would you mind moving? I booked this seat." At that moment, the man sitting across from her, her partner, I assumed, lifted his head and locked eyes with me. His expression was hard, his tone already edged with irritation. "Can't you just find another seat?" I blinked, caught off guard by his tone. The train was nearly full and I knew there weren't any other available seats. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I would if I could," I said, gesturing around, "but the train is packed and this is the seat I reserved." The woman still didn't move. She just sighed and looked down as if she was hoping I'd just give up. Meanwhile, her partner, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a tense expression, leaned forward slightly. His presence alone was enough to make me uneasy. "Look, mate," he said, his voice edged with impatience. "Just sit somewhere else, it's not a big deal." I swallowed my frustration. "It is to me. I booked this seat for a reason." Finally, the woman sighed again, as if I was the one being unreasonable. She shifted slightly, but still didn't make any effort to move. "You don't have to be difficult about it," her partner muttered. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, but from discomfort. I hated conflict. I wasn't trying to start something, but I also wasn't willing to just stand for 5 hours because someone had taken my seat. "I'm not trying to be difficult," I said, my voice still controlled. "I just need to sit down." That's when he leaned back in his seat, crossed his arms and exhaled sharply through his nose. "Well, someone else is in our seats," he snapped, "and my missus is pregnant." I hesitated. For the first time, the woman looked up at me fully, her expression unreadable. A flicker of guilt passed through me, but I pushed it down. "I understand," I said carefully, "but I have a heart condition. Standing for long periods isn't easy for me either." His expression didn't soften. If anything, his irritation only grew. The man's eyes narrowed and his posture stiffened. His irritation was shifting into something closer to outright hostility. "You're seriously going to make a pregnant woman move?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. I took a slow breath, keeping my composure. "I'm not trying to be unfair, I just booked this seat because I need it." His lip curled in frustration. "And I'm telling you that my wife is pregnant. We're all dealing with stuff, mate." I could feel the tension in the air thickening. A few passengers nearby had started to glance over, sensing the rising conflict. My hands clenched at my sides. "I get that," I said firmly, trying not to let my voice shake. "But I also have a medical condition. That's why I reserved this seat." He scoffed, shaking his head like I was being dramatic. "So what? You think your issue is more important than hers?" I didn't know what to say to that. This wasn't a competition. It wasn't about whose struggle was worse. It was about the fact that I had specifically booked this seat so I wouldn't have to stand for hours. "Look," I started, keeping my tone as level as I could. "I just don't think it's fair to expect me to stand when I paid for a seat. I'm not trying to cause a problem. I just want to sit in the seat I booked." His jaw tightened, and then suddenly his voice rose. "Are you serious? You're actually making a big deal out of this. I could feel the stares from other passengers now. My face burned, but I didn't back down. I just want to sit, I repeated, my voice quieter but firm. That's when his expression hardened completely and his tone turned sharp. You know what? You're a real piece of work. The words stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. My heart was already starting to beat faster, something I needed to avoid. I had to control my breathing, keep myself steady. I'm not trying to make this a fight, I said, gripping my backpack strap a little tighter. I just need my seat. I have a heart condition. Standing for hours could be really difficult for me. For a split second, I thought that might change something. Maybe he'd see that I wasn't just being selfish, that I had my own valid reason for needing the seat. But instead, he let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, so now you've got a heart problem. His voice dripped with sarcasm. How convenient. The woman beside him shifted uncomfortably but still didn't speak. I wasn't sure if she agreed with him or just didn't want to be involved. I sighed, trying not to let the frustration creep into my voice. I'm not making it up. That's why I booked this seat in advance. He shook his head, exhaling sharply through his nose. Everyone's got problems, mate. My wife is pregnant. You don't see us throwing a tantrum about it. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't going anywhere. I'm just asking you to speak to me with respect, I said, my voice low but firm. I understand your situation, but I also have mine. That's why we book seats. To avoid situations like this, he scoffed. Unbelievable. There was a beat of silence, just long enough for me to think maybe, just maybe this was over. But then, he leaned forward slightly, his tone dropping into something colder. You must feel real proud of yourself. I felt my stomach tighten. His words weren't just dismissive anymore, they were meant to provoke. I'm not proud, I said, keeping my voice steady. I just want to sit in the seat I paid for. He let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. Wow. You really don't give a damn about anyone else, do you? The way he said it, loud enough for the people around us to hear, made my face burn. A few passengers were watching now, some glancing away quickly when I met their eyes. I hated this. I hated being at the center of a conflict, being made to feel like I was in the wrong when all I had done was ask for my own seat. I took a slow breath, trying to control my heart rate. I don't think this needs to turn into an argument. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, then stopped making it one. My grip tightened on my backpack. Look, I don't know what else to say. I booked this seat because I have a medical condition. I didn't expect to have to fight for it. His expression darkened, and I didn't expect to run into someone so damn selfish. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, his voice rose again. You know what? Go ahead. Make your complaint. Cry about it. If that makes you feel big, knock yourself out. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I pushed it down. This wasn't worth engaging in. I just wanted to sit down and get through this train ride. I took another breath, steadying myself. I just want this to be over. His eyes stayed locked onto mine for a moment, full of frustration and something almost like disgust. Then finally his wife sighed, shifting in her seat. Forget it, she muttered, standing up. She rose from the seat slowly, her movements tired, but she didn't look at me. For a brief moment, guilt twisted in my stomach. But what was I supposed to do? Stand for 5 hours just because she didn't want to move? I stepped aside as she grabbed her bag and shuffled to the empty seat her husband pointed to. The second she was settled, he turned back to me, his expression filled with disdain. Hope you're happy now, he sneered. Real nice of you to kick a pregnant woman out of her seat. I didn't respond. There was no point. No matter what I said, he had already decided I was the villain in this situation. I slid into my seat, adjusting my bag beside me, trying to focus on anything other than the tension still crackling in the air. But he wasn't done. You've got nothing to say now, huh? He said, voice dripping with sarcasm. Funny how quiet you get once you've got what you want. I stared out the window, trying to let his words roll off me. Engaging with him would only escalate things further. Unbelievable, he muttered, shaking his head. People like you. No shame. His wife didn't say anything. She just sat stiffly in her new seat, eyes focused downward. I could feel the eyes of other passengers on me. I didn't know what they were thinking, whether they agreed with him or if they saw the full picture. I just wanted this ride to be over. Just as I thought things were settling down, the man sitting next to the couple suddenly leaned forward. He was middle-aged, dressed in a button-up shirt, and had been silent throughout the whole ordeal. Now he glanced between me and the angry husband before speaking. "There's space across from him," the man said, nodding toward the empty seat diagonally opposite me. "Why don't you both just sit there?" For a brief second, I felt a rush of relief. Maybe this would finally put an end to everything. The husband scoffed but stood up, motioning for his wife to follow. "Come on, babe. Let's sit over there, since this guy clearly has no decency." She didn't say anything, just quietly moved to the new seat while he settled in across from me. But the moment he sat down, he let out a short laugh. Then, to my disbelief, he turned toward me, pointed a finger at my face, and smirked. "Look at him," he said, nudging his wife. "Bet he's real proud of himself." I felt my face heat up, but I forced myself to stay still. I wasn't going to give him the reaction he wanted. "Probably thinks he won something," he continued, still laughing under his breath. "Kicking a pregnant woman out of a seat just so he can sit on his ass. What a joke." A few passengers glanced over, but no one said anything. I didn't expect them to. No one ever wants to get involved in something like this. I turned my gaze toward the window, pretending I couldn't hear him. But even as I tried to tune him out, I could still feel his eyes on me, still hear the occasional scoff or muttered insult. This wasn't over for him. The tension in the air hadn't faded. I kept my gaze fixed on the window, trying to ignore the occasional chuckle or sarcastic remark from the man across from me. His wife remained quiet, staring down at her lap, while he seemed determined to drag this out for as long as possible. Then, finally, a small moment of relief, movement from the far end of the carriage. The ticket inspector was making her way down the aisle, checking tickets as she went. I exhaled slowly, hoping this would at least bring some sense of order back to the situation. As she approached our section, the man suddenly leaned back in his seat, arms crossed. "Watch this," he muttered under his breath. She reached our row, offering a polite but no-nonsense nod. "Tickets, please." I pulled mine out immediately, handing it over without a word. She checked it quickly before moving on to the couple. The husband handed his over with an exaggerated sigh, muttering something I couldn't quite hear. The inspector scanned his ticket, then his wife's before glancing back at them. "These aren't your assigned seats," she said plainly. The man stiffened. "Yeah, well, someone took ours, so we had to move." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you report it?" He let out a scoff, shifting in his seat. "No, because what's the point? This guy," he gestured at me without even looking, "threw a fit over a damn seat. So we moved. What's it matter?" The inspector remained unfazed. "It matters because these seats belong to someone else." She gestured toward the carriage. "I need you both to move to the seats you were assigned." For a moment, the man just stared at her, as if waiting for her to change her mind. But when it became clear she wasn't going to, his jaw tightened. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. His wife sighed and slowly stood up. Without another word, she grabbed her bag and began making her way down the aisle. The man stayed put for a second longer, shooting me one last glare before following her. As they disappeared into the next carriage, the inspector turned back to me. "Are you all right?" she asked, lowering her voice slightly. I nodded, still feeling the weight of the last half hour pressing down on me. "Another passenger already made a complaint about them," she added. "If anything else happens, let me know." I forced a small smile. "Thanks." She nodded before moving on, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As soon as they were gone, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The train felt quieter, even though the background noise of passengers chatting and the rhythmic clatter of the tracks hadn't changed. I should have felt relieved. I had my seat, the inspector had handled the situation, and the man and his wife were gone. But instead of satisfaction, all I felt was exhaustion. I adjusted in my seat, suddenly hyper-aware of the lingering stares from some of the other passengers. Most of them looked away when I met their gaze, but a few still held that unreadable expression, one I couldn't quite decipher. Were they judging me? Did they think I was in the right? Or were they silently agreeing with the man who had spent the last 30 minutes trying to humiliate me? I shifted my focus to my hands, rubbing my thumb over the edge of my ticket. The words from earlier replayed in my mind. You must feel real proud of yourself. Kicking a pregnant woman out of her seat. I swallowed hard. I wasn't wrong, I knew I wasn't. I had booked my seat in advance for a reason. I had a medical condition that made standing for long periods difficult. That's why assigned seating existed in the first place, to prevent situations exactly like this one. And yet, I glanced toward the aisle, half expecting to see the couple again. I thought about the way she had barely spoken, the way she had just quietly followed her husband's lead. Had she really wanted to stay in my seat? Or had she just gone along with whatever he decided? I sighed, leaning back against my seat. I had done the logical thing, the fair thing, but for some reason, I still felt like a jerk. Now that the chaos had passed, I was left alone with my thoughts and the nagging question that wouldn't leave my mind. Had I been wrong? I replayed the situation over and over, trying to see if I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have let it go, found a way to stand or sit somewhere else. Maybe I should have just ignored the whole thing since she was pregnant. But then I thought about my heart condition, about how I had specifically booked that seat so I wouldn't have to struggle. If I had given it up, I would have been the one suffering through a long ride, just to avoid confrontation. Still, the man's words echoed in my mind. Kicking a pregnant woman out of her seat. That was how he saw it. How some of the passengers might have seen it too. But was that really what happened? I had asked politely. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't been rude. I had just insisted on sitting in the seat I had paid for, something anyone in my position would have done. The only reason this had turned into an argument was because her husband had escalated things, and yet I still wasn't sure how to feel. I stared out the window as the landscape blurred past, my fingers tapping lightly against my leg. Maybe I had done the right thing. Maybe I hadn't. So, I'll ask you, was I the asshole? Should I have just let her stay in my seat because she was pregnant? Or was I justified in standing my ground? A young British man, around 25 years old, with short brown hair and a slightly tense expression, sitting by a train window. He wears a dark blue jacket over a light grey sweater, with a backpack resting on his lap. His face shows a mix of frustration and doubt as he stares out the window, lost in thought. The train interior is modern, with dim lighting contrasting against the bright daylight streaming through the window. The atmosphere feels heavy, capturing the tension of the recent conflict. High contrast between the cool blue tones of his clothing and the warm golden light from outside.